Starting over doesn't mean you're getting further away from what you want or from what you deserve. It means you're getting closer to it. It has to be, because if you decided that the path you're on, the person you're with isn't right for you, and you're cutting ties there and you're moving in a different direction, well, by definition, you're trusting that that definition now has what you want. So by logic, you're not getting further from it. You're getting closer to it.
Welcome, Case. We are so excited to have you. I've heard so much great things. I did my research last night on dating, you name it. So I feel like I'm coming in here like professional on this.
Thanks, man.
Would love to just get started in terms of like anyone who doesn't know you, like what you do and your purpose.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for having me. I always think it's funny when people are like, I did my research. I'm like, oh man, I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I listened to 10 episodes last night or something. I'm like, that's a lot of Case. Because after a while, you'll pick up on like I say a lot of the same things, or like I repeat a lot of the phrases. Yeah. And it's just funny to think of someone like being in my world for like an hour or two.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the joke that I say is I joke that I share my feelings for a living. Just because there's not like one word to really describe what I do. And I think a lot of people fall in that in this day and age. There's like so many different ways to make money, so many different ways to create and have output. Sharing my feelings for a living takes a lot of different forms. It's basically, I'm a guy who's passionate about the topic of mindfulness, both in the way that it's added value in my life, the way that it helps other people, and the way that it allows me to productize, create communities, be an entrepreneur, bring mindfulness to life in different ways, not just in the form of content, which I would say is the majority of my focus, but products, communities, service. I do like a lot of consulting, helping brands bring mindfulness to life in their category, in their market sector. So yeah, I mean, it's like I kind of sit on the cusp of being like an art guy, because I write all day, I do music all day, I do production all day, but then also I'm in the numbers all day on like the business side. So it's very cool. It's a gift and a privilege, of course, to do something as ambiguous as share your feelings for a living, and to have people support you. And really, people are so nice to me. It really is crazy. So I'd say that's predominantly what I do, and obviously we'll talk about mindfulness and everything like that. But
yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to jump right in, right? Because I think a lot of people listening, like mindfulness can be described in so many different ways. Like, how would you describe mindfulness, and like, how did you get into this journey?
Yeah. I mean, I would describe it in the only way that I know, which is the most practical way, which is it's the art of self-awareness that leads to action. And obviously that's super basic, but like I think about like so I'm 35. In my 20s, I used to think of a word like mindfulness. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, that's not for me. That's for people who go on silent retreats and talk about aligning their chakras and frequencies and energies. It's not me. Like, those people are fine and cool, but it's just like not my vibe. I'm not the guy who wears the robes and the chakras and the crystals, not me. So I used to kind of be, I don't want to say anti, but I would say cynical towards wellness, self-help, things like that. It just wasn't my vibe because I didn't understand it. When I was 28, I don't want to say quarter life crisis, because I think crisis is a word that should be reserved for actual crisis. So I would say just, quarter life questioning when I was 28. I just got out of a long-term relationship. We lived together. Was also at the time traveling a lot for my day job. I worked in advertising sales for 8 years at this company. So at that time I was traveling to Toledo and St. Louis and Kansas City twice a week, like little small Chicago to there and back, rent the car, go to Hertz, do the whole thing. So very pound the pavement. Between those two things, there was no particular catalyst for it. I think the breakup might have been one, but I was basically, man, it would really suck to look back in 10 or 20 years and be like, I was doing all this just because it was easy to follow that path. It's easy to date the same people. It's easy to swipe on an app and go on another date, meet another woman. It's easy to go on another sales call, get another 10K, get promoted to vice president, whatever. I was like, it would really suck to look back and realize that this wasn't me. And I'm very type A, and being in sales at the time, I was hyper type A. And the fact that I didn't have a great answer to some of the questions that I was asking myself, why am I doing this? Why do I have this goal? Why do I feel this way? It frustrated me. So I was like, I want to figure this out. I want to have an answer. So really in 2018, the solution that I came up with was to start a podcast. I think nowadays it's more common to do that. Back then I saw it as a really vulnerable way to answer some of these questions for myself. Hop on a mic, ask myself a question, force myself to answer it, and put it out into the world in the form of convincing myself of certain things or questioning certain things, and just sharing what I've learned along the way. And that was basically the start of everything. It was a challenge to myself. And then what I realized through that process, what I was doing twice a week on the podcast was mindfulness. So I never went into it being like, I'm going to be mindful.
Yeah.
I was asking myself questions, breaking things down, challenging myself in different ways. And what I realized was I was practicing mindfulness. And then through that, I realized a lot more about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a muscle. Mindfulness is 100% something you get better at. I learned the power of different questions. And then, I realized also that what I was going through is super, super common. And, a lot of people related to it. And then the podcast started to blow up, and eventually I quit my job. That's the long and the short story. But it came from a very, truth-seeking place for myself. Like, never had any aspiration to get into the wellness industry or be an influencer or anything like that. So, I think it's really just a story of a guy who did something for himself and then started to pull on that thread of interest. And then as I got deeper down, I was like, oh man, sales career, sell a thing, entrepreneurship background, start a product. I started putting together the puzzle pieces that got me to that point. But I'm still figuring it out. Even being 35, like, the business model changes every couple of years. And, I have no idea where I'll be in 5 years. So it's been really rewarding. I always say that the podcast is my form of therapy as well. So I've grown a ton as a person, and it's opened up a ton of doors, and, it's just been really, really rewarding.
Amazing. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people go through this, right? Like, it's for you, your catalyst was, but one of the catalysts was the breakup, right? But again, like, I know a lot of friends who have gone through these same breakups, right? You date someone, you live with them, especially in your 20s, right? As you're trying to figure everything out. And then one day, you break up, or maybe you get fired from your job, whatever it may be. And then you get hit with all of these things, right? Because it's so easy to get stuck in this day-to-day routine, and you almost need a big catalyst to wake you up, to question your life, to see, is this where I want to be doing? Do I see myself doing this for the next 5 years? Is it going to take me to where I want to be?
Yeah. I mean, that is the crux of one of the angles of mindfulness. It's like, when life gives you contrast, a breakup, a failure, a big, curveball in your life, like, what do we make of it?
Yeah.
And I think it's so powerful, exactly that. It's a catalyst to break cycles and habits and comfort. And specifically, it's a catalyst to break mimetic desire. I don't know if you've ever dove into the idea of mimetic desire.
Yeah.
Rene Girard, it's just this whole idea of that very little in life that we pursue, have pursued, will pursue, is devoid of influence for other people. Like, we're doing things because we've been influenced to do them. Doesn't make us bad people by any means. I mean, we're social creatures, right? We've all been influenced in some way. Like, why do we want certain clothing? Why do you want that watch? Why do I want this watch? Like, there's certain things that we could justify on our own, but mostly because we saw someone else wear it that signaled social value to us, and we want to replicate, and so on and so forth. It's the same way with jobs and partnerships and ideas of relationships. This whole concept of mimetic desire, I think contrast in life, a chapter ending, is the ultimate ability to question where you are in that path and form a new path. And so if we don't take advantage of those, it's so easy. And my biggest fear in life is to get old and just have regret.
Yes.
Regret's terrible, right? Because inherent in the definition of regret is the past that you cannot change. And it terrifies me to think that I could look back and I just was on this one linear path the whole time, some of which was great, of course, but there were all these other paths I could have taken, which would have been more true to me, and I didn't, because I was afraid to challenge the comfort that I was in, or I was afraid to take advantage of that moment, that catalyst. That terrifies me, and I don't want that. So that's like my whole ethos, is asking ourselves questions amidst frustrations so that we can make the most of them.
Yeah. Have you heard of Jeff Bezos's like regret minimization framework?
No, not specifically.
Yeah. So that was my breakthrough was I remember in college, like what you said, mimetic desire. Everyone was getting these top internships, right? They were working on Wall Street. They got this finance job, this consulting job, this tech job, and like none of it like interested me. And I went down this deep rabbit hole on regret. And I came across Jeff Bezos and this clip, and basically he talks about the regret minimization framework and how you want to be making decisions on a day-to-day basis that minimizes your regret, 5-10 years from now, because I think that's the biggest thing that haunts people on their deathbed, right? Is that the what if?
Yeah.
So.
I'll need to catch up on that, but yeah, I mean, I think we're very quick to forget how like little daily actions lead to like long-term pathways.
Yeah.
Like we need to find a way to incentivize ourselves to do different things and try different things, and not in like a maniacal, crazy ADD type way, like where we just have no commitment to any path. Like I think there's are certain things where we need to do the opposite, which is not get shiny object syndrome and not try new things. And the key to life is finding the balance between the two, which I think we're all still learning. But I mean, I think it's a key of being willing to invest a lot of time in something, but also being open to new ideas. I mean, I went to Notre Dame and I majored in Chinese. I majored in Chinese and Arabic. And that was a full commitment. It was a full immersion program of Chinese every single day for 4 years, Arabic 4 days a week. My whole thesis.
You can speak Chinese, Arabic fluently.
Many years ago, yes. I mean, college was 13 years ago. Then I lived in Shanghai. I worked at a law firm there. Like I was committed to that as a career path.
Wow.
And I chose those languages because I was oddly good at languages, even though I'm super pale and don't look like I have an ounce of culture about me. I was good at languages. I was always just really good at languages. I sucked at it. I was so bad at accounting. I could not balance a P&L to save my life. But I was good at languages, and I was good at like the really tough languages. And so I went all in on that. And my idea, of course, was to do international business with Chinese or some kind of government work with Arabic. And I went pretty far down the rabbit hole with both of them. Lived in China, worked at a law firm in Shanghai. NSA, Arabic. I did some interviews with the NSA talking about different programs there. Ultimately, never moved in those directions, and I got into marketing instead. Which everyone goes into marketing at some point, it seems. But that was such a gift to be open to that. I almost took this job in Taiwan selling SIM cards in 2011. It was like 17 grand and a BlackBerry was the payment. And I almost took it. I don't say the money to say like that's not enough or whatever, but just like who knows what trajectory that would have led me on if I had been like, well, I've done 4 years of this. I can't stop now. Like imagine if I had that mentality, it could have been rewarding. I don't know. We can't really connect the dots for a hypothetical, but I think being willing to, explore new paths has served me really well. And then even get into sales. Like when I moved to Chicago to work in advertising, and I was a completely different person, very shy, very timid, never raised my hand, very self-conscious. And I went into advertising sales, which is very aggressive. Technology sales is like all about relationships, all about eagerness, type A, hustle. It's the whole thing. It's the boiler room, but for technology sales. And I had an opportunity to get into it because I knew someone, and I was so out of my depth, but I proved myself, and I ended up, elevating myself to vice president and leaving at that company and like doing really well there. So, I mean, I'm not pumping my stock, just like showing the value of like being open to these things that are like very, very uncomfortable on the surface.
Yes. And I really want to emphasize the point you just mentioned, which is connecting the dots, right? You can't ever connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Yeah, I love that.
And so you got to take risk, and sometimes you don't know, but I almost feel like in those situations, you trust your gut, your instinct. And I think most things end up working out when you just have a good intuition. So
yeah, I think that's I talk a lot about ego, and obviously Ryan Holiday, and ego is the enemy. We don't even have to talk about what that means. Yeah, ego is the enemy, right? The ego that says, you're the best and you know everything and everything you touch is gold. That's the wrong kind of ego. But I think there is a healthy ego that says, whatever happens next, I can handle. And therefore I'm willing to try new things because I have the ability to react, to forgive myself, to be compassionate to myself, to be urgent but patient, to like do these things in balance with one another. Like that's the good ego. And I think it helps you challenge blueprints. Like one of the sayings that I always come back to that I love is there's no right way to live your life, but there's a wrong way. And the wrong way is to think that there's a right way. That always stuck with me because, I'm 35 on the cusp of like the, Gen X, like career path, do this, get married, house, blah, blah, like if you're not doing this, you're wrong. And, I'm right on the cusp of that where my mom was a lawyer, my brother went to Harvard, like very traditional career path. He's a cardiologist, and I share my feelings for a living. And that was always in my head forever about there's a right way and a wrong way. And I need the right way. And I think we put ourselves in a corner very quickly when we think there's a right way. That person has the right way because, oh, look how happy they are. Or that's how you're single, or that's how you're in a relationship. I need to emulate. And I think back to mimetic desire, mimetic theory, the more you try to emulate potentially the further you get away from what's true to you. So I think all in all, finding a way to challenge that, finding a way to challenge the right way. That could be a right way that your parents told you is the right way the internet wants you to think is the right way, whatever it is. Just finding a way to like just be open to it, not in an asshole kind of way, but just in a respectful way to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So what was going through your mind, right? Obviously, and again, I think this is so relatable to so many people. Is you majored in something in college, right? And you choose a major in college when you're 18. You don't know what you want when you're 18, right? So you choose that major, and then the normal thing is basically you got a job related to your major where you moved to Shanghai, right? What was the big catalyst there where you were like, okay, I need to basically move back to the US and do something else?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a costly learning curve there. Yeah. Cause I mean, it was even like moving to Shanghai was like last, getting a job in 2011 wasn't terrible, 2008, but it wasn't great.
Yes.
So I was one of the few people in 2011 compared to my friends who all work in finance, BCG, consulting. They all got their jobs. There was still a market there. For me, I was that silly arts and letters kid who, I interviewed with, BCG and folks like that and just didn't have a path. So I was like, I just need to get to China. I need to prove that 4 years of learning a language was for something. So I got this job. It was like a job internship, paralegalship over there where you didn't need a law degree at an alum who owned a law firm over there. Went over there, and through the months of doing that, I realized I didn't want to work in law. It was that quick for me. I was like, this sucks. I was like, for one, this is not Suits. This is not the show Suits that I thought it was. This is terrible. And again, it was like corporate M&A type law, and like multinational type stuff. I was basically the guy who stood at the table and turned pages for clients. So literally would just stand there and turn pages while they did stuff. And again, of course, that's what you do when you're entry level, of course. But I just realized very quickly that it didn't have the creative edge that I needed. So when I came back, I mean, it didn't feel great. It felt like not necessarily failure, but just like, that was a poor investment. Like the ROI is not there for this. And it was also a sense of urgency. Like I need a good job. Like I need to put food on the table. And luckily, I knew some people who helped me get a job at Leo Burnett, one of the ad agencies in Chicago, and got a job there.
How old were you then when you?
23.
23. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm obviously very, very young. But like it finally felt good to find a job that paid and that offered purpose and some creativity. I mean, I think looking back, that was the move for me, because marketing, advertising, and copywriting and strategy is everything to me, and it opened my eyes to like what I think is such a gift in life, to be a mix of art and science, and I love it. I love it. And perhaps that's me like looking back and like rationalizing it, but it felt really good to be like, all right, I'm still proud of myself and I can move on even if I'm not using Chinese currently.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where, it was just moving so fast and like finding a path that made sense for me. But, I think there's a certain level of like trusting your intuition. Like this feels right. Like I feel challenged, but also like at home, like that, I think that was really important to me. I remember even I was interviewing with the NSA at the time too, which was like a whole other story of going in and doing polygraph tests and things like that. And they were basically like, hey, this is really great. Like, we're really interested in having you on board for one of our like clandestine overseas operations units. But they're like, so basically, from here, just go ahead, go out into the world, take a job. And, maybe a year or two from now, we'll let you know, because they like do a whole thing on your life.
Interesting.
So even when I was working at Leo, I was like, I'll just wait for that knock from the NSA, and then I'll go, get my Jason Bourne on. That never came, so perhaps they didn't like what they saw. I don't know what they found, but anyway, yeah. I mean, I even today, it's like I still don't know what my career path is, but like it excites me because every day I get to wake up and decide what it looks like. So, I'm definitely not a career counselor, so hopefully no one's taking career advice.
It's interesting hearing these different parts of your stories, because I do think there's one principle that really ties back to a lot of this stuff, which is you were willing to give up the past, right? Because I think for a lot of people, once you make that investment, you almost have to keep going, right? Oh, I spent 4 years
Yeah.
majoring into this. I must do this. Or I dated this person for 5 years. I have to get married to them, right? Even when things are going wrong, even when things don't look like it's going to work out, you almost have to convince yourself to keep pushing on the relationship and that like this is normal, or you're justifying in different ways. So I do think how you approach that is like that mindset is so key. So
Yeah. That's a topic I'm really passionate about. I mean, it's basically the idea of starting over, right? And like to your example of relationship, you're like, I've invested 3 years into this relationship. I'm not getting any younger. And we have this idea that starting over means that you've messed up so bad that you've got to go all the way back to zero, that all that was for naught. And obviously, we can kind of patronize ourselves and say, well, what about the lessons learned and the good times you had? And I lean on a lot of that. I think if we're always thinking that failed relationships or short-term jobs or temporary people are detrimental to your life and add no value, I think that's really sad. I think we should all be able to look back and say, hey, that time studying Chinese, well, that was really great. And here's this memory that really served me well, and this and that and the other. Hey, my ex, who we had an ugly breakup, but we had some good times together, and I'm going to remember that. I think that's really powerful. But once we get to the point where that moment happens and we go in a different direction or we break up or whatever it may be, I think we need to find a way to pivot understanding of starting over. The soundbite that I always say is starting over doesn't mean you're getting further away from what you want or from what you deserve. It means you're getting closer to it. It has to be, because if you decided that the path you're on, the person you're with isn't right for you, and you're cutting ties there and you're moving in a different direction, well, by definition, you're trusting that definition now has what you want. So you by logic, you're not getting further from it, you're getting closer to it. And then also like all the sayings about like, you're never starting from zero, you're always starting from experience. I think it's so true. And as much as it is kind of cliche to say things like that, I think we can prove it to ourselves. Like my whole thing with mindfulness is incentivizing ourselves to see like opposites, right? Whereas we usually see pessimism, how can we train ourselves to see optimism? Where we see failure, how can we see redirection? Things like that. Not in a patronizing way, because again, I hate that. Never have been that way, but like training ourselves to look at observation and say, here is proof of why this is true. And like, even in the case of like, you're never starting from scratch, you're always starting from experience. It's like, I have this stupid little thing when it comes, like I used to be like pretty lenient, pretty, submissive and insecure. Like the key to developing confidence is embarrassing yourself. That's the only way, is embarrassing yourself, putting yourself out there, trying new things, raising your hand, shooting your shot, doing those things, so that in those instances you either fail or embarrassed and you realize it doesn't freaking matter, or two, you succeed and you realize how strong you are. But either way, you have to do it. Like my whole thing is, I used to gamify it. I would say I get a point. Like anytime I do something awkward or embarrassing or something that makes me uncomfortable, I get a point. And I cash those in for confidence as a metaphor for myself. And it's always been the same way with other feelings that make me uncomfortable. Disappointment, for instance. Disappointment's a horrible feeling. No one wants to be disappointed in themselves. And I'm not trying to be disappointed in myself, but I think a lot of people aren't disappointed in themselves because they've lowered the bar so much. So in the instances where I do feel, oh man, I really let myself down, I say, well, I need to listen to why I let myself down. And I'm going to listen to that and I'm going to take that with me so I never get that feeling again. So like filling your cup with these things that you can turn into something, whether it be confidence or pride or a new standard, like proving that to ourselves. And I think when it comes to the idea of not committing to a path just because you've been on it for a while, the only way to break free from that is to reframe how you see starting over. And I think if you could apply some of those things, it could really help you.
Yeah. And I think like taking that approach in terms of just everything you do on a day-to-day basis is so key, right? The half glass full versus half glass empty. So it's great that you really emphasize those things, because I think it's just it's nerve-wracking, right? It's easy to see it once either you've gone through it or you're looking at it from like this outside perspective. But when you're in it, right, it's I see it a lot as well. Like it's easy to have negative self-talk every single day and not have a positive frame on a lot of just issues that, or things that may not even be issues, but you create issues out of thin air because of this negative self-talk you have with yourself.
Yeah. I think exactly that. I think negative self-talk is what keeps you on a path, or dating the same people, or doing the same business model that you've never changed and you never get results on. It's that talk that keeps you there, whether it's negative self-talk, like you're an idiot, you'll never succeed, like everyone else is better than you, or if it's some kind of bully self-talk where it's like, oh, you're gonna be that person, you're gonna try that, who are you to do that, things like that. I think it's terribly debilitating. And I think, for me, a big way that I found to like break out of that is I've kind of changed my goal for myself. I think a lot of people, and myself formerly, you would ask me, hey, like, Case, what do you want out of life? Or like, what's your goal right now? And I would say, I just want to be happy, or I'm working on being successful, or I want to be confident. I think those are great goals, of course, but I think there's a certain element to being human that when you're not happy, when you're not successful, when you're not confident, we devolve to negative self-talk because we have all this proof of failure, depression, anxiety, lack of confidence. And so we just start identifying with those feelings, all because we've set this North Star. I need to be happy. I want to be a happy person. So I don't do that. I don't say I want to be happy. The word that I always come back to is I say I want to be proud of myself. And I know, again, cheesy, but being proud of yourself comes solely from actions. Big actions and small actions. Actions as much as I'm sitting here, I look at the dishes, I should do the dishes. I get up, I do them. I'm proud of myself. Man, I really want to do a collab with Martin Garrix. I should figure out how to talk to his label, email the people. I'm proud of myself for trying, so on and so forth. The more you're proud of yourself, the more your actions are going to follow. The more actions you take, the more results you're going to get. The more results you're going to get, the happier you're going to be, the more successful, the more confident, so on and so forth. So again, my whole thing is mindfulness, self-awareness without action is I don't want to say meaningless, because there's obviously a certain space where you should just exist and be still. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's like your self-awareness should lead you to do things differently, or in simpler ways, or whatever it may be. So for me, my goal is I want to be proud of myself, because I've realized the connection between a feeling of healthy pride with actions, and then actions with happiness, success, confidence, whatever it is. And I found that really does help minimize the bad self-talk, because it's like, yeah, okay, sure, I feel insecure, for instance, but I'm doing all the things to make me not insecure. I'm doing the things, so shut up. And like, I push forward. I respond well to some like healthy tough guy talk. Not everyone does, but I think pride is like a good lens to look at your life through.
Like, I feel like almost all of these things start with mindset, right? And I think that's something you dive a lot into. So I would love to kind of just go down that rabbit hole in terms of mindset, right? Because I think this is just one form of it, but it's very tough to develop self-awareness, I feel like, for a lot of people, right? Because you don't want to admit just the truth. It's brutal, right? And so I think a lot of people, there's a term that I spoke about this the other day with someone. It's like you're in a loop, right? Because you want to change, but your body's not letting you, your mind's not letting you, and you get stuck in this cycle over and over and over again. And it's a toxic cycle, and it's a loop, right? So how did you develop that self-awareness to basically break past that loop?
Yeah, well, I think I think about breaking down the word mindfulness, because it all comes back to this idea, like, what does mindfulness mean? Well, on the surface, like, we could use the definition in the word, like our English teacher would hate us, but mindfulness is the art of being mindful. To be mindful is to be aware, right? So on the surface, you'd say, oh, mindfulness is self-awareness. But to your point, what does that really mean? Like, I could be aware that I'm a raging alcoholic and I should stop drinking. I could be aware that I shouldn't be spending 10 grand at a club every weekend. I'm aware of problems, but unless we're willing to then say, okay, this is a problem that needs to stop, what is the value of self-awareness? There's not a lot of self-awareness in a vacuum is not that valuable. Correct. When it comes with actions, that's where the real value is, of course. And we all know this, but to everything we're talking about here, changing a course of behavior can be incredibly uncomfortable, especially one that is the result of conditioning in childhood, adolescence, and that's been reinforced through years and years and years of repeated narratives in your head. If you're telling yourself yellow car, you're going to spot yellow car everywhere. And yellow car being a conditioned interpretation of life or of yourself. So for me, when I think about the word mindfulness is self-awareness, but that's not enough. To be truly effective and lead to action, it has to be mindfulness is self-awareness. Self-awareness is radical honesty. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? We can say, I have this problem. Why? Let's get to the why of it. Where is this coming from? Again, it's a little stronger. It's still not great, because there's certain instances where we're willing to be honest, certain instances where we're not willing to be honest. Mm-hmm. I think the word why, WHY, is the most powerful word in our arsenal. I think we're very quick to not ask it. I think we're very quick to only ask it once. I think you need to ask yourself why many, many times, both in regards to what you're doing and what you're not doing, who you are and who you not are, who you are not. I think it's very important. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think mindfulness is challenging what you know and showing you what you don't know. And if you're not open to both of those things, it's not going to be that valuable. So I think, you know, to be a mindful person is humility. It has to be. And if you don't have that, if you're rocking with ego's the enemy vibes, it's just not going to work for you. And yeah. I know lots of self-aware people who are very destructive. Does it really matter? And they know it too. It's, you know, you talk about the idea of manifestation, for instance, about the way that you can speak things into existence. Well, you can observe life and you can have certain perspectives on life that reinforce destructive habits. So I think we have to humble ourselves massively. I think the easiest way to do this is therapy for one, but journaling. I think journaling is the greatest way to finally be like, I'm going to be honest with myself, not self-aware, but honest. And then we're going to see what goes from there. But yeah, it's, you know, if you don't want to be that way, you're not going to be. So you've got to find the right catalyst, and then you've got to be in a humble headspace.
So tell me a little more about journaling, because I've never journaled before, but I know it's, you know, so many people do it, and it's I've heard just amazing things. What would you say are the benefits of journaling?
Yeah, you should journal. You should do a little ice cold plunge and then journal. Yeah. That should be a good.
I think that's a great morning. Right now, I do the ice plunge.
Yeah, I saw it out there. Yeah, it looks dope. I mean, I always wanted to be a journal guy, right? I remember, you know, 2016 or 17 being like, oh man, everyone's journaling. Like, that's pretty dope. Like, cool. Like, I've got to be that guy. I've got to get up at 5 and journal. And obviously that's not true, but saw a lot of value in journaling. And then I would go out and buy a bunch of journals. And for me, none of them really worked well because the journals either fell into one of two forms. They were one, kind of bullet form journals or like stream of consciousness journals where I was like, how's your day? Like, how are you feeling? Like, who do you want to be? And I was like, I am a little too ADD for this. I need focus, or otherwise I'm just going to keep writing down the same things. I'm going to write down the self-awareness without the honesty. Where does that get me? Or there were journals that were just stressed me out. They were like, all right, 7 a.m., write this down. 3 goals for the day. Come back at lunch. How you doing? At the end of the day, reflect on the day. 10 things you're grateful for. 5-year plan. It was just like, this is making me more stressed out. And of course, I'm hyperbolizing these, but they generally fell into those categories. So literally just in 2019, I was like, I want to create a journal that I would use. This is parallel to starting the podcast and like what I was learning and some of those things. So I basically just created a journal, the New Mindset Journal. Which basically the whole pitch was just a mix of prompted and unprompted, so good balance. But also, the value of journaling, as I see it, is the little things, right? What's something you're grateful for? How are you feeling? Where is your head at? Things like that, little calibrating tasks. But more so, very, very challenging questions. Challenging questions that I came up with because I think that's my talent in life. And that's the value of it. So for me, I think a good journal and that the power of journaling is making you uncomfortable, not just reinforcing what you want to repeat to yourself. That's why like I get value out of what am I grateful for, but at a certain point it just becomes a rhetoric. Oh, I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for another day. But like, how are you going to prove that to yourself? How are you going to go out there and actually prove that, not just written down because it sounds good and maybe feels good in the moment? So I'm big on calibration, but then very challenging questions that should take you 20 minutes to answer one question. And I found that works really, really well. And it relies on the idea that like, there's a couple of different types of mindfulness as I see it. There's like an esoteric mindfulness that says mindfulness is spiritual. All energy flows through you. We're all one. That's kind of going back to what I was being cheeky about earlier, chakras and vibrations and stuff. That's great. It works for some people. It doesn't work for me. My mindfulness is very logical and it's very observation driven. I have lived through A, therefore I believe B. I've lived through B, therefore I believe C, like lawyer type stuff. Like here's the evidence, here's the judgment. That I have found is very powerful because we all have memory banks, we all have experiences. What we do with those experiences, what category we assign them to, that is what matters. And I think the best kind of journaling is a mix of prompted and unprompted that gets you to look at those memories and challenge them or re-question them, maybe helping you recategorize them so that when you're in the moment and you're dating someone or you're going down a path, you're relying on those memories to support healthy assumptions about yourself rather than I'm unworthy of love, or, I'm an imposter in my business, or whatever it is. That is mindfulness. And it goes back to what we were saying a minute ago about being open-minded to challenge what you already know or invite a new piece of information into your life.
And I think it compounds, right? Because what you're saying is this act of daily journaling, it's more than just journaling. You're questioning your thoughts, your beliefs, right? You're really internalizing and spending time thinking, which I think, like what you mentioned it before, the self-awareness aspect, right? It's easy to, one, if you're not self-aware, it's usually because you don't want to question these things, right? And then number two, like what you said, it's one step further than just self-awareness, because self-awareness without action, like what you said, is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's actually a great point. And usually the point that I really try to hammer home is like, journaling is great. I hope everyone who journals gets immediate value from it. It's like working out in the gym. You get beginner gains, right? Like the first couple months, you're like, oh man, I'm getting stronger. I'm getting bigger. It's great. And then eventually it kind of plateaus and then you've got to work harder to get the gains and lift harder. It's like the same way with journaling. I think if you haven't journaled before and you start it, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I feel free. I feel lifted. I feel like I'm not carrying these things. And then eventually, if you don't follow kind of what we're talking about, it's just going to be repetitive rhetoric. I think the real value of journaling is to develop a journaler's mindset so that when you're not journaling, you're carrying that mentality with you. So that, for instance, twofold. One, you're out living your life. Something frustrates you. You don't sweep it under the rug. You address it. You're having an argument with a friend. You don't sweep it under the rug. You address it. You do the uncomfortable things. And also your actions follow suit as well with the things you're willing to try or not try or whatever it may be. That is the journaler's mentality. So that's why I'm so big on journaling. It's not just the moment that you do it and you feel good and you're like, oh, that was a good investment in my inner life, but it's your outer life too, through exactly what you're saying. It's the actions.
So take me back to your mindset, right? When you were 28, you just went through a big breakup. You were living together with your ex, and obviously, I think a lot of when people go through that, right? It's maybe they might change jobs or move to a different city or whatever it may be, but and maybe you did some of that, but I think the big thing that came out of that for you was the podcast, right? Starting the podcast. So like, one, how did that thought even come up, let alone, because I almost feel like that's you're now putting yourself out there again in a way where you're still trying to recover from a breakup.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I was like, I'll show her, I'll start a podcast. That seems to be the vibe looking back. No, it was like a good breakup. Like it was one of those breakups where I was like, she broke up with me because I pushed her to that point, but like we were not compatible. I just didn't have the courage to break up with her. So it was one of those things where it's like maturity or whatever it is. I'm like so grateful for that. Like if that didn't happen, who knows where we'd be. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it goes back to I think for me, very type A at that time, but just like frustrated that I would have thoughts that I didn't act on. Like even in that scenario, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many guys that I've talked to over the years who know that they're in bad relationships, not necessarily toxic ones, just bad ones that aren't right for them. They don't have the compatibility, but they don't want to hurt her. They don't want to disrupt comfort. Oh, they're such good friends with their family. They've invested 4 years in a relationship. Like if I had a nickel for every time I've heard that, men or women, frankly, be wealthy. That's a huge problem. And I was frustrated with that in myself, both from that specific instance, but just in general, just like having thoughts or feelings or aspirations and not acting on them. That just really frustrated me. And I was like, here's something, a podcast where no one can tell me I can't do it, because podcasting, you just need a mic and some production software and it's pretty simple. No one can tell me that I can't do it. And then also I was like, I'm not even going to do guests. I'm going to put the onus on myself to come up with content. So no one can stop me there. So admittedly, there was a little bit of ego at play in the beginning, just proving something to myself, proving that I could sit down and do the thing that I was averse to doing, but also proving to myself that I could form an opinion on something and stand behind it and stand up for myself. That was really big. And I've done 482 episodes. You can't help but grow by taking one singular question and talking about it for 20 minutes straight by yourself. So that was really the motivation there. And then I never went to therapy or anything like that. And I very quickly started seeing the value of these things. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, I mean, I would lie too if I didn't say that. Like, it was very validating to have people reach out and say, you're doing great. I can relate. That was powerful. Things like that. I don't think we should necessarily hang our hats on external validation, as anyone would tell you, but I do think it's helpful, especially in business, listening to customers, content, listening if it helps people.
It's momentum, right? It's confidence to keep going. So.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So it gave me a lot of encouragement. I remember the first month, this isn't going to sound like an impressive number, but in podcasting as an independent podcaster, it was pretty difficult. My first month, I got 57,000 listens on the pod.
Wow. What would you say? Because like, I feel like most people, maybe nowadays it's different, but if you put out a podcast for a month, you won't get 57,000 listens.
You're not going to get anywhere close unless you have like a big following. You're going to get like 1,000 listens.
Correct.
I'd love everyone to get more.
Yeah.
But it was a difficult thing. I was like, man, that was kind of crazy. So it just like
it just took off pretty early on.
It took off very quick, and I was just kind of like, wow. I was like, people care what I have to say, and I said something of value. We can go way back. We can get therapeutical here and talk about like growing up, never felt that people would really listen to me, or like they favored my brother, or adolescence or upbringing or whatever it may be. But like something in me was insecure to the point where I didn't think people would really care about what I had to say. Who am I to give advice? Like, I'm the guy who doesn't feel secure in his career. So it was this really interesting dichotomy of a feeling and a fact. And the feeling was, who am I? I feel lost. What am I doing? I don't want to regret. And then the fact was feedback and confidence growing from the fact that I was doing this thing that I wanted to do. And what's that? You're might be good at it. Like, it felt really good, of course. And there was no ulterior motive. I wasn't like, I got to make money off this. I got to quit my job and do this full time. So it was just a very freeing moment. And then I think doing the podcast as a side hustle along work was like really, really smart, because it gave me leverage, because I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do. Like, I could have quit my job fairly early on to do the pod, because once you hit like $100,000, like, you can make some good money off it.
Yeah,
it's very different from like YouTube or TikTok, where no one would blink an eye at 100,000 somethings.
From sponsorships.
Yeah. From ads, and if you have an e-commerce, and because a podcast audience is very different from a TikTok audience.
It's very loyal.
It's very loyal. It's very personal. You're in here and you're in here. It's just very different. So you get 100,000 people listen to your podcast, 5,000 of them, 4,000, 2% conversion rate. 2,000 people will buy your product. So you could do some crazy things.
Yeah.
As long as you build a good product and everything. But I was very adamant about giving myself financial leverage and decision-making leverage by working that job parallel, so that I didn't, like, because I knew it would have happened. If I had quit that job the second I hit 100,000 on the podcast, I would have been like, oh God, today's Monday. I have no guaranteed revenue. I have no income. I'll do that deal. I'll do the Fashion Nova deal. I'll do the Celsius Energy deal. I'll do this. No disrespect to them, but just thinking of brands that would pay. And I would have said yes to everything. I would have created every product. I would have created every course just to make money. Not necessarily a bad person, but I've just seen it a lot, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to build something that was personal, that I was proud of. So I worked that job for 8 years. 8 years. 3 of which were with the podcast.
Yep.
So I did it for 3 years, parallel to the podcast, and then eventually I made the decision. But
so one of the points you touched on right before this was upbringing, and I think this is such a key thing, because I think a lot of insecurities or personalities or whatever it may be, even your mindset, comes from your family upbringing, right? Like your environment in your household, and that's unfortunately something that a lot of people can't control. Right, you're just born into your family, and your family environment is basically what you grow up with, and it will dictate your personality, your insecurities, and your emotions. So, walk me through kind of like what your upbringing was like, and how you think that kind of like dictated your insecurities, like what you brought up, and would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think. For me, I'm still unpacking that, because I used to be that guy. I'm like, who cares, man? You're a man now. Who cares what you were like when you're a kid? Like, grow up. And I was like that for a while. And I think a lot of men are like that. A lot of people are like that. It's like, I'm 20 years removed from living in my parents' house. Who cares? But I think we're remiss about how certain ages and what we're told and what we do and how we're brought up really does leave a long-lasting, very subtle, subconscious influence on our life. I mean, I think the saying that any therapist will tell you is we're all victims of victims. And, you know, the reason that we were imparted with those insecurities or beliefs wasn't because the person giving it to us wanted to hurt us, but because they were hurt or influenced in some way as well. You know, I mean, I think for me, I had and have, my parents are alive, an amazingly supportive upbringing. I attended Waldorf school when I was young, which is like a Montessori learn through playing kind of mentality. Very hippie stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like no technology, no math or science. It's all playing. It's when you're young.
Yeah,
and not like can't read good. It was really cool. I think it gave me a lot of creative freedom, and one of the reasons that I'm fine saying I share my feelings for a living. If you went to my apartment here down the road in Miami, it's like arts and crafts time in my apartment. So I'm always writing little things. I've got little quotes I got to write. I got to take these later. Like I'm always doing this stuff. And I take pride in that. I think that's great. And I think a lot of that encouragement came from that. I think I had a lot of pressure growing up, certainly. And my brother went to Harvard. My mom was a lawyer. It's like a very smart, traditional family. Mm-hmm. So I think I had a lot of pressure, probably put a lot of pressure on myself. Round and round we go. I think, you know, for me, there was always, you know, I think money is a topic that a lot of people have strange relationships to. I think for me, it was always, you need financial security. You need a 10-year plan. You can't take risks, right? Because people are counting on you, or eventually people will be counting on you. So like a kind of a sense of impending doom unless you follow a path, right? So, you know, not terrible things by any means, but I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think what I've realized, and a lot through my studies, usually I relate most closely to just like a very intuitive sense of mindfulness, like learning through observation and logic. But I have done a fair amount of research when it comes to this kind of stuff. I mean, there's something called the Cartman drama triangle, which basically, you know, outlines how adolescence shapes how we respond to conflict, drama, insecurity in life. And basically, it's an inverted triangle that says you either become a rescuer, a persecutor, or a victim. Rescuer wants to help other people. You avoid your own shit. You avoid, you know, dissecting your adolescence by helping other people. The persecutor blames other people, and the victim is the victim. And I think that does a really nice job of describing kind of the various headspaces we can get in as a result of not even necessarily childhood, but adolescence, relationships. You have so many relationships that are poor, that are bad, that are one-sided. Like it's very easy to get into a victim mentality or a persecutor mentality. You know, I think a big part of mindfulness is coming back to why. And I think if we ask why enough times, we're going to start going back on the linear timeline, and we're going to get to some of those really pivotal points. And that's where I would encourage people to stop listening to me and start going to a therapist, because I think, you know, it does require a certain clinical mentality to really unpack some of those things. But I mean, I've talked to some people who've had amazing breakthroughs when it comes to like really focusing on why. Why do you have a certain mentality and security? Where did it come from? Well, likely something in your adolescence. Who was I talking to the other day? Amazing woman, but she was talking about how she remembers so vividly being like in third grade or something. Someone told her that she looked like she ate a lot of cheeseburgers, which like is kind of a funny thing. But also, I mean, she remembers that, and she's like 36, and she's like, I've carried that with me my entire life, and I've hid behind myself my entire life because of something someone told her when she was fucking 8. Like insane levels of stuff. And like, even that, like, even I'm joking about it right now, and I'm like quick to, you know, sweep it. I think we carry things like that with us, even though it's like such a pass away statement. But when we're young and we're being molded, and even now, if you have like a bad relationship when you're 20, another bad relationship when you're 22, another bad relationship when you're 24, like same thing. Like we're conditioned to believe certain things based on experiences, of course. Where does, you know, expectation come from? So I think a big part of mindfulness certainly is retrospective healing, forgiveness, resetting of assumptions, but it's way easier said than done. But it starts with everything we're talking about here, which is why. Yeah.
And that example you brought up is again, I almost feel like it's relatable to most of the population, right? Like, especially as a child, I think that's when your brain is most susceptible to being molded and you take things internally, right? So some comment someone's made in elementary school, junior high, high school, bullying, whatever it may be, like it carries on with you for a long, long time. And if you don't address it, it eats at someone for almost their entire life.
Yeah. I think about along those lines, like I think about the topic of manifestation, right? It's the number one topic. You open up TikTok and you've got a fitness girl who's like, yeah, I woke up this morning and I manifested and then I went about my day. No hate to TikTok girls, just the example that came to mind, to be clear. It's just become this kind of cultural trope, right? Where you're like, I manifested. Hey, did you manifest today? Yeah, I manifested. Everyone manifested. We're good. It's like, what does that mean? And, not to detract from anyone's definition of manifestation, but I think we need to get specific about beliefs. I'm fat, cheeseburgers. I'm insecure. I'm unlovable, right? We need to get our facts straight about how we overcome those through the idea of manifestation, which is simply resetting how you see reality. That's all manifesting is, so that you can get to actions that actually create the reality you want. The whole idea is like, if you have a belief system, let's say I am unlovable, and that is what you tell yourself. Okay, so you're saying I am unlovable, therefore no one will love me, therefore everyone is a fuckboy, every woman is crazy, every this, that, or the other, right? You're constructing your view of yourself and the world around you. For me, it's just a logical manifestation. If you're telling yourself these things, how do you expect to then go out and experience a world that is opposite of that, right? So you have to sit down and say, okay, what am I saying about myself? What am I saying about the world? Put that there. And over here, what do I want out of life? I'm unlovable. I want to find my soulmate. I'm fat. I want to be healthy, right? You have a belief system and then you have a desire. If those things aren't aligned in some way, if you haven't created a path to allow them to be connected, how can you possibly expect to tell yourself one story about the world that is in direct contrast to what you want? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So when I think about like manifesting, it's literally just connecting the two. Like, you have to tell yourself a story that at least allows the possibility for what you want. Otherwise, you're telling yourself one thing and expecting another. And I just don't see how that's possible. It would have to be the result you want would be the exception to what you're telling yourself. If you're saying I'm unworthy of love, but I hope one day I run into my soulmate, it's just not going to happen, because your actions aren't going to follow. You're not going to have spot a yellow car, spot healthy behavior, spot red flag behavior. You're not going to be doing that. So I think when it comes to overcoming limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome, whatever these identity challenges we have are, it's bringing those two things closer together. So, I mean, these are journaling exercises that I encourage people to do, right? It's, stating these uncomfortable truths that you've been sitting in next to the desires that you have, and finding a path to connect those, to reset these, to reframe these, because otherwise, just logically, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think if we try to apply a logical lens, we'll realize that our thinking is kind of backwards, and maybe it'll give us the incentive to reset.
Yeah, and I think, again, like what you said, you need to basically make that connection, because when you hear this stuff out there, journaling, manifestation, right, mindfulness, there's so many different takes on it, and I really like how you simplified it in those situations.
Yeah,
so
I think we have to. I mean, because if it's not simple, then we get drawn into how it was in my 20s, where it's like mindfulness, yoga, sound baths,
you
meditation.
make these assumptions, right, just from stuff you see online. So
yeah, and then you just you never try.
Yeah.
So exactly.
So growing up, were you someone that expressed your feelings pretty easily, or not at all?
No.
Interesting. So I would say I'm pretty like you in that sense, and I think it sounds like you've gotten to the point where now it's what was weird to you before is just this almost, it's literally your life, right?
Yeah.
Sharing your feelings online. So someone like me, what would your recommendations be in terms of I grew up in the traditional Asian family, and it's a very type A type of family growing up, right? You don't really celebrate your wins. You don't really share your emotions or say, I love you, right? It's really just go, go, go. And, it's grades, it's college, you name it. And so, and starting a company and managing employees, it's something I've had to work towards in terms of being better at expressing my emotions, my communication. But even then, I know it's a long work in progress. I'm nowhere near to the point where I can be in terms of communication, expressing my feelings. So what would you recommend to people? Because I think a lot of people just, even regardless of the upbringing, they might not want to communicate clearly, whether that's, fear of confrontation, right? Whatever it may be. So what are your tips to become a better communicator?
Yeah. So I mean, I can give all the tips in the world. Talk about like let your inner radiance shine, and like you be your true self, and the right people will connect with you. And rejection is redirection. All the tropes, right? Which again, I support, and some people respond really well to that. For me, I more favor like brute force mindfulness that incentivizes you so heavily to do something that makes you uncomfortable to disprove an inclination that you've been living through, namely not sharing your feelings. The advice that I come back to in dating, which will come back to this idea in general about being more emotionally honest, is I talk to women all the time, and specifically women, because I think this is more of a social expectation of women being more passive in relationships. And they always say, okay, so like, how do I know what this guy intends for us? Like, we've been dating for a month. I just don't really know. And my first question, of course, is, well, have you had a conversation? And they're like, well, no, because I don't want to seem needy or crazy. I don't want to be that woman. And I get that, of course. But again, I come back to how can we incentivize ourselves to get clarity in life? And I always come back to you have to speak up, because when you speak up, you either get one of two things. You either get what you want, which is, yeah, babe, like I'm exclusive with you. Like I'm so excited. Thank you for bringing that up. We should have had this talk. That's my bad. Or you get I'm not really ready for a relationship. You get what you need. So when you speak up, you either get what you want or you get what you need, both of which cannot help you more, both of which are completely for you and set you free, right? You talk about getting off the wrong course or getting on the right one. You get what you want or you get what you need. I think it's the same thing when it comes to being emotional and expressing your needs, your sensitivities, whatever it is, and not in like a silly way, maybe a silly way, but just in an honest way. I think we need to incentivize ourselves to have a mentality of get what I want, get what I need, not in a self-serving, selfish, boisterous kind of way, but approaching your honesty through that lens and your relationships with other people. If I'm not being my true self, for one, I'm not serving either of us because I'm not getting what I want or what I need. And also, when it comes to relationships, I think a lot about like why we do these things, right? It's of course we don't want conflict, like you said, and we don't want to be rejected. Who would, right? It's very easy to sit here and be like, rejection's fine, but it's not. It could be debilitating. So I think it's very common for people to water themselves down or to not be real because they think it's making them easier to love. And I think practically that is true. You're making a version of yourself easier to love. Your partner, your business partner, your friend, your parents, they're like, oh, they're cool. No, we're the same. They don't have different desires or priorities or sensitivities. All good. But you're making a fake version of yourself easier to love. And by the law of logic, you're therefore making the real version of yourself harder to love. And for me, logically, it does not compute. Why would I ever want to be in a relationship where through my action or inaction, I am making the real version of myself harder to love? It does not compute. I can't live with that. So in those scenarios, I have to get what I want or get what I need. And not just it's we. Like we have to get what we want or what we need. That person who is expecting and maybe falling in love with a fake version of me, that is not what they need. They think it's what they want, but it's not real. So we have to come back to a real version of me, what I want, what I need, and think in that sense. And I don't know, I respond really well to that because now I'm focused on outcomes, or at least chapters, and it's aligning my behavior and my ability to talk, not to cement a fake version of myself and not to rationalize it. We're very good at rationalizing, saying, no, I'm not the needy, I'm not the chill one, so on and so forth. I just released an episode on how we have this inclination to confuse words or just ideas. We confuse the idea of sacrifice with betrayal. We think in a relationship, for instance, I'm chill, I'm cool, I don't want to bring that up. No, they've got enough on their plate, like we're all good. We think that's sacrifice, and because we know sacrifice is good. Of course, any relationship requires sacrifice. Of course, joint responsibility. It's just the reality of a relationship. But we do it so much to the point where we're simply betraying ourselves in the sense of staying quiet, all those things that we promised we would never do again from our past relationship, not acting on them, not voicing our true selves, not voicing our true standards, boundaries, expectations. The more we stay in the land of sacrifice, at least what we think is sacrifice, we're leading closer and closer to betraying ourselves. Betrayal sounds like a harsh word, but if you look it up, it just means to be unfaithful to. So when you're not acting on what you truly want, what speaks to you, your true emotionality, you're not being faithful to yourself. And it doesn't require some grandiose gesture or anything. It just be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Get what I want, get what I need. So long answer, but I'm really passionate about it. And really for me, it just comes back to how can you incentivize yourself to act? What would be on the other side of acting? What positive things would be on the other side? And I think when you can contextualize it as what I want or what I need, as a logic-driven human, I'm gonna be like, well, both of those things are really great, and those are the only two outcomes. So I'm gonna act.
You have great reframes on a lot of this stuff, right? Because I almost think that's what all of this is tying back to, is your perception and your frame of what's going on, right? You can treat communication as this taboo subject and not address it, or you can see it in your light, and then now it's a positive thing that you now must do to get, either what you want or what you need.
I think you say something like this to a therapist, they're gonna raise an eyebrow. It's like, I feel compelled to be honest, and I think there's, you should never have a compulsion to something, but like, I've trained myself so that, again, through the lens of pride, if I'm not being honest, I feel disappointed in myself. And I think that is the path to a free life, a life where you're actually acting in alignment with what is true to you. Topics like self-healing and forgiveness and all those things follow, but it's, how can you sit down and create a very personal incentive for you to do these things and say these things and act with intention towards them? That is the application of mindfulness, not just being aware of, I've got a feeling, it is what it is. It's incentivizing yourself to act on that.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm excited to dive into this next topic, which is dating. And I think this is a perfect segue into it.
Love it.
Because I think this is what I'm sure you get so many people reaching out to you about dating. What would you say are the most common things you hear about, in your inbox, in your DMs, in terms of dating and the issues people are going through?
Well, I would say category wise, it probably boils down to questions of clarity, which I think we just covered pretty nicely. Mm-hmm. We're afraid of getting clarity because we're afraid of the one option, which would be rejection. So I think we covered that nicely. I think a lot of us live in limbo. I talk a lot about this area of life I call the gray area, which is hoping for someone else to show you interest, hoping for someone else to dictate the pace of the relationship, hoping for someone else to say, this is what you want and this is what you deserve. I think a lot of us are very confused by what people offer us. We think that what someone offers us in a relationship is what we deserve because they offered it to us. But there's a big difference between that and what you actually deserve. I come back to, quotes that I've written over and over again of like, there's a difference between someone who wants you and someone who deserves you. And I think that lack of clarity in our own heads of figuring out what those two things look like, very detrimental. And again, I'm not big in the land of fairy tale dating advice. You deserve the best. You're a 10. It's like, yeah, you're a 10 because XYZ. We're going to list it out. You're going to show me why you're a 10. You deserve this person because of this, that, and the other. I think the greatest point of clarity that you can offer yourself is reciprocity. That's my favorite word in the world. You can sit there and say, I deserve these 10 things in a partner. And I would say, yeah, you absolutely do. As long as you do the same 10 things over here or, comparable things, right? Reciprocity. You deserve someone who is honest because you're honest. You deserve someone who, is intentional because you're intentional. Someone who is kind because you're kind, so on and so forth. That is the clarity you can give yourself. And I encourage people to kind of audit themselves when they're amidst those points where they're like, mixed signals that, mixed signals this. I don't know what I want. I don't know what their intention is. Look at it through the lens of reciprocity, for one, and also challenge yourself. I do talk to a lot of women who tend to confuse attention with compatibility. Two very different things, of course. And again, the idea of what someone offers you isn't necessarily what you deserve because you deserve more, or less, maybe they're being generous. But again, it comes down to what you offer and what they offer. Two wholes meeting together, not, half and half, nothing like that. So I'd say that's trend one, lack of clarity. I think there's lots of questions we could ask ourselves, but I think reciprocity is the lens. And then the flip side would be true, which would be closure. So clarity in the present, closure from the past. I wrote a book on closure. I've written a lot of things on breakups and moving on and things like that. I think a big reason why we don't get clarity in the present is because we're still hanging on to the past and we don't want to repeat those experiences. So we just stick it out without clarity, so on and so forth. I think that the soundbite that I always repeat is closure isn't a team sport. It's not a team sport. I think a lot of practical assumptions are made around how to get closure in a relationship. As ridiculous as it sounds, because I would never do this. Like, a breakup's a breakup. You're done. I'm moving on. Like, I don't want to revisit that. A lot of people, think about closure as, oh, we got to get on the same page. Like, I want to have another conversation. I want to understand why this, that, and the other. And it's basically asking for permission to move on and do what's best for you. And I think with age and maturity, people quickly learn that. But I think when you're younger, there is this pull to like want to be on the same page or to know why. Something about knowing that why for some reason we really hang on to, even though it probably hurts us more. So closure and clarity, I think, are probably the two biggest sticking points.
What would you say are the biggest mistakes people make dating in their 20s?
Well, I would say probably just impatience. Like, again, I'm a straight man, and I think it's different for men and women. Men, just biologically and society-wise, what's the rush? All good. Who cares? I'm 35. I'm in a relationship, but I'm not married. Who cares? I'm not in a huge rush. It's different for women, of course, and I try to empathize with that. But I think rushing creates all kinds of different issues, particularly when you're young. It leads to the clarity issues that we were just talking about. It leads you to overlook red flags. It leads you to say, oh, that's good enough. Oh, they're offering me that, so that's probably what I deserve. Or, oh, I'm asking for too much, and that's good. Or, I've invested a year in this relationship, don't want to start over. I think we have a big problem with rushing to check a box. And I think likely that comes from our inclination to define a lot of our worth and our identity through a relationship. And a lot of that, unfortunately, comes from our parents. Like, a lot of the pressure comes from parents and their parents. I mean, you think about our parents' parents, depending on how old they are. My grandma was born in 1920. Think about the different social expectations then and now. I interviewed a woman the other day who's 102. The expectations back then are so wildly different from today. And there's a million factors at play in that, of course. You got 2 world wars. You've got a huge revolution of industry. You've got a housing market. You got everything that is just wildly off kilter. The fact that we allow some of those generational expectations to be passed down to us without challenging them, again, they're not wrong. We're all just, again, acting out of what we've been taught, leads us to rush. I wrote a book called Single is Your Superpower. Obviously, supporting the angle that you should be single, and not necessarily like go out and be a single fuckboy or something like that, but go out and be single man or woman because you shouldn't be in a rush to be in a relationship to check a box. And I wrote a whole book on why that's the case, and had a lot of easy answers like, being single is a time to celebrate yourself, learn about yourself, so on and so forth. One of the proof points that I came back to, which is literally just an anecdote, but if we can't learn from people who have been through a lot of life, then I think we're in a dark spot. I like to ask older generations what they regret. I'm talking about people, 60 plus, what they regret in life. So I've asked that question a bunch of times, probably 100 plus times. I've heard a ton of answers. The answers that relate to love, relationships, soulmates. I've never heard anyone I've asked that question say they regret being single. I've never heard anyone say, man, I regret in my 20s having been single for longer than I wanted. I've heard every variation of the opposite. I regret rushing getting into a relationship, getting married too soon, having kids too soon. I regret staying in that relationship because I was afraid of being alone. I've heard every variation of that. I've never heard an older person say, I regret being single. So you can take that for what it's worth, which might not be anything if it's just an anecdote to you. But I also see it as, if you believe you have a lot to offer and you're a confident person in the direction of your life, or that you'll end up where you'll want to be with the person you want to be, then what's the rush? The rush is self-imposed by direction of society imposed. So again, brute force mindfulness. Can we find a way just to challenge that feeling of rushing? And then I also do think a lot of it, in this day and age, loneliness is a freaking epidemic. It is.
Yes.
I've seen some science-backed studies. It is like smoking 2 packs of cigs a day. Like, it is terrible stuff.
Wow.
So I do see a lot of people acting out of loneliness, and no one is wrong for doing that, of course. I think rightfully so. I think we should all do things to avoid those feelings, healthy things, but we confuse healthy things with unhealthy things. And we get into relationships to not be lonely. We stay with the wrong people to not be lonely. We do these very self-destructive things in order to offset another destructive thing. So loneliness is a topic I talk a lot about, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. But I think it comes back to rushing and settling and, turning your back on your, depending on how old you're going to be, the next 50, 60 years of your life that I think we're rushing through because we've set these premature timelines, again, and especially if you're saying, I want to be happy in life. And you talk to a lot of people who have, basic aspirations. They would say being happy is having a job that pays the bills, having a partner, and leaving a legacy. Those are good goals. But I think we've put way too much onus on the idea of a relationship as proof of your validation, proof of your lovability. Just because you aren't with someone doesn't mean you're not lovable. I think a lot of times we confuse like a breakup. We think a breakup means lack of worth, especially if we've been broken up with a lot. It's not about lack of worth. It's about lack of compatibility. And that's the clear eyes, 20/20 vision observation that is very likely true. It's not because you're an unlovable person. It's just because, unfortunately, you've dated people that you're not fully compatible with. But you compound all those things. You put it in a blender and you drink it as a smoothie. You've got rushing. You've got loneliness. You've got devolved self-worth. And it's no wonder then that when you're younger, 20s, mid-20s, 30s, we're rushing through those things.
It's just so interesting. Like all this stuff. Dating now, how social media has fueled it too, because going back, like what you said, 100 years ago, right? So my grandparents aren't 100 years old, but my grandpa's 85, my grandma's 80, and they were in an arranged marriage. They've been married for 55 years now. And I can't even imagine someone in today's day and age getting an arranged marriage and staying together for that long. It's basically impossible, right?
Yeah.
And so you have social media, you have competition, you have insecurities being exposed even more, just, seeing other people living the lives that you want, people having a lower attention span growing up with social media, which in turn I also believe plays a part in connecting to the impatience, like what you talked about in terms of dating, right? Or there's so many other options. Yeah, I don't know. Dating in today's market, I feel like it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any denying that it's tough. Certainly. I'm not a dating app hater. I'm a dating app celebrator. I think it's fantastic. I think, if you're someone who wants a relationship, you've got to go fishing where the fish are, and they're on dating apps, and it's fantastic. But certainly dating apps have aided in this idea that the grass is always greener somewhere else, that if a relationship were to fail, you could always get in another one, on the other side of what we've been talking about, kind of like window shopping idea where you just never settle down. I think, and then you combine that with just the pace of society. We can't afford homes anymore. It's like you can't even think about a relationship at certain points either. We're on the flip side of what we were just talking about. I just think there's a lot of variables at play that just make comparing ourselves to even our parents' generation almost impossible. I don't think it's fair to ourselves to do that. But again, I don't think it's, you see a lot of economists and, people study people talking about this and talking about how it's terrible this and terrible that. It's I don't know. First of all, what the heck do I know? I'm just a guy, but it's just different. And different doesn't necessarily mean worse, but different necessitates a different lens to look at things, namely self-control. Yes, if you're on a dating app and in social media and you're a DM away from flirtation, this, flirtation, that, there's always going to be a million options. You have to know what you want. And when you've found it, you're just done. You're off the market and you're done. The challenge is so many people don't know what they want.
Yeah.
And I'm never blame those people. It could take a long time to know what you want, right? If you don't know yourself, how do you know what you want? It could take a long time to know yourself. So again, round and round we go. The conclusion that I come back to is mindfulness. Mindfulness helps you know yourself. Know yourself first, then go out there and start dating, or do it concurrently, or at least have the introspection to say, I'm doing these things. I have these certain inclinations in dating and relationships and hooking up, and I'm doing it. Why am I doing it? Let's get back to the basics. Let's stop hurting other people. Let's stop hurting ourselves through these self-destructive habits. And let's have some freaking self-control. Like, I'm a tough love guy. Like, if I talk to a guy and I'm like, you're just being an idiot. Like, why are you going on dates when you just told me last week that you're not ready for a relationship? I'm like, why? Your mentality does not align with your actions. And same with women too. Like, I talked to a lot of guys who were like, yeah, she said she really wanted to, with this, that, and the other. And then her actions were this, that, and the other. It's like, maybe she's lying, maybe she's not, but like, let's align intentions with actions. But we're very averse to doing that because, for one, examining one or the other can be uncomfortable. Again, something about our past maybe taught us that we're validated through short-term love and we're scared of what long-term love looks like. I mean, we start talking again about the drama triangle, things like that. Like, we talk about love languages, like, what is the partnership that you seek? What is it doing for you? Is it validating? Like, what is the role that you take in a relationship? So again, I think all that does come back to, like, what do you want? What is the point of a relationship for you? Like, literally, what is the point of dating another person?
Yeah.
Like, is it just to do it? Is it because you're lonely? I don't think those are great reasons. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would agree with that.
Yeah. There was this funny meme I saw on Instagram the other day where it was like, the talking stage is the worst because you're texting your girl good morning while she's still hooking up with her ex, and 10 other guys are in her DMs like texting. And I think that's just like, yeah, it's and dude, in Miami as well. I mean, obviously you're in a relationship, but
Yeah.
Miami like definitely is a pretty big hookup culture.
Yeah.
And I feel like dating's a lot tougher in Miami. So like, what are your thoughts on hookup culture?
Oh yeah, I can't imagine dating in Miami. I can't imagine that. The other weekend, this was just like a bucket list thing.
Yeah.
I had a friend who their company was just bought, so they were celebrating and they invited us. So we went to 11 last weekend. My girlfriend and I went to 11, and obviously 11 is not Earth. It's not a accurate.
It's a different world.
Of,
it's a different planet.
But it's just like I was like, what is going on here? And like, it's just like average, ordinary looking people in there that just like, in that context, it's just a wildly different world. But anyway, I was just thinking about that. I mean, hookup culture is hookup culture. I think it's fine. If your intention is you just want to hook up, great, have at it. That's the gift of being a sexual being. That's fantastic. Good for you. But I think the problem happens when that intention gets murky for yourself. We're talking about yourself here first. Like, if your intention is to go out and, find a partner, and you have an idea of what partnership looks like and what understanding looks like and connection and compatibility, yet you're still doing that thing, it just doesn't make sense. How are you going to do one thing and expect a different reality? But again, I think if that's your only intention, that's fine. And then, of course, the real problem occurs when you have mixed intentions with you want to hook up, they don't, so on and so forth. The only way to break that down is through get what you want, get what you need, communication. But I don't know. I get to ask that question quite frequently. I'm like, oh, sleeping on the first date, is it okay? Is it not okay? I'm like, yeah, it's okay. I know people who slept on the first date and are happily married. I also know people who didn't sleep together for months and then got married and then got divorced. So I don't think there's any rule either way. I think just, the problem happens is where you have an intention or some kind of offsetting expectation of like why you're doing things. It's like, I try to stay away from the land of like really practical dating advice. Like, oh, wait this many days, or say this, or like, this is how you get the guy or get the girl. What do I know? I've never been a particularly suave guy and I don't know the rules of dating. I think we get ourselves into trouble when we're like, oh, here's the rules of dating, or here's what you do. Because for one, I think it sets bad expectations. And when a certain expectation isn't delivered, we start thinking, oh, this is unhealthy, or this is not a right relationship. To get a little bit away from your question, the example I come back to again on communication is I talked to a lot of women who are like in a relationship and they're like, yeah, I just feel like he doesn't really tell me I'm pretty, or he doesn't say the things that really make me feel validated. I'm like, that's great that you know the words that you want to hear, for instance. Or I talked to a guy and he's like, yeah, I just don't feel like she's really interested in me. She never really asks me questions or something like that. I'm like, well, it's great that you know what would make you feel understood. Fan-freaking-tastic. The only way to be loved fully is to tell your person how to love you fully. I think the right person is going to get really close. That's the great thing about finding your person. They're going to get you on a level that no one else has gotten you, and it's going to be fantastic. But I think we're so off base to think that this person's going to come into our lives and we're not going to have to give them any directions and they're just going to do the right things, because for some reason we think that that's not romantic to say like, hey babe, like it really makes me feel good when you say this or ask this or whatever, maybe, or in bed, do this, whatever. We think that that's not romantic. We think it takes the romance out of it because our soulmate is supposed to know us exactly. And I shouldn't have to give them directions. And I think that's so off base. And you talk to any dating counselor or, you know, family therapist, like they're gonna smash that to pieces because it's so off base. So I think, you know, for the right person, if you know you two are dating and you go to them and you say, hey, you know, this would really make me happy, they're going to be like, oh, amazing, you just gave me the blueprint to make you happy, and I want to make you happy because we love each other. They're going to want to hear that. So again, I think the big theme we're coming up here with is communication.
Yes.
Which is a freaking boring topic to talk about, but I mean, it's really the key to everything, because you either get what you want or you get what you need. And in the case of loving someone where you genuinely love them and nothing could break that apart, you want them to give you as many instructions, details, blueprints as possible. So it takes the guesswork out of things. So long-winded, maybe backdoor answer to the hookup question is like, that's fine as long as there's communication around it. And if someone starts to catch feelings, don't hope to play catch up on it. You got to communicate it, get what you want, get what you need, and get out or stay together.
Yep.
But otherwise, I think humans are not very intelligent in certain senses. Like, we can try our best to love someone, we can try our best to guess other people's intentions, but at the end of the day, we're going to get it wrong so many times unless we talk about it.
Yeah, and I think once emotions get involved, all logic goes out the window.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
We're emotional creatures.
Yeah.
One of the books that really helped me in my dating was the 5 love languages. So like communication, right? Because you may think, you know, your love language could be physical touch, right? But if your significant other, that's very low on her love language, then you reciprocating touch back is not going to make her feel loved.
Yeah, I feel like I wrote one of those together here. Maybe I didn't. Yeah, anyway, I wrote that one about, these quotes are so funny. I wrote that one earlier about communication, being direct.
Love is being direct about what you want to eat for dinner, your love languages, and in bed.
Got to be direct.
I agree.
Yeah, I think a big love language, which I think is, you know, somewhere between words of affirmation and all those, is like being understood. I think is a big one. I think we all want to be understood, and we don't feel understood. It's horrible, right? Why would you want to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't know the real you or hasn't taken the time to get to know the real you? I talk a lot about understanding in a relationship. I really do think it's like a core tenet, because once you understand someone and they understand you and you understand them, that's for one, it's a true test of eagerness, but it's also like, once you understand someone, you could really see if the true compatibility is there. Because if you understand them and you're like, I don't really like what I see, then you could do whatever. But understanding is such an important tenet. But I think we miss out on like what it actually looks like. To have a close relationship with words, right? As an author, there's a big difference between understanding that and understanding why. I think a core tenet that is a requirement in any relationship, talking earlier about knowing what you want, is you deserve someone who like offers you empathy at face value, right? If you go to them and say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or hey, you said that thing earlier and it really hurt me, you deserve a partner who, even if they don't agree with you, even if they think you're overreacting and it's silly and they were just kidding, I was just kidding, who cares? Like, or what, you're overwhelmed, I have a much busier schedule, what's going on? Even if that's your mentality, you, as a healthy partnership, you deserve to understand that they feel that way. It's blanket empathy. It's, I don't know why, but I understand that, and I'm going to accept your feelings as valid. Same with you talking about earlier about sharing your feelings. Like, you deserve someone who you could say that, and even if they disagree, even if they don't understand, they say, I understand that. And then evolution 2 would be getting to the why behind it. But I see a lot of unhealthy relationships where the partner doesn't have understanding that, they don't offer empathy at face value, and instead they do the flip-flop of that, the reverse of it, which is requiring them to validate why they feel that way. So you say, hey, those words really hurt me earlier, and then the partner says, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you be hurt by that? I was just kidding. Like, why you require them to validate it? Very, very unhealthy. And I see, I think now we're combining two topics of communication and understanding, but I think any healthy relationship, particularly one that is underpinned by what we're talking about, communicating and blueprints, is you're going to have someone who offers empathy at face value. You could literally say anything. You could be like, "Hey, I feel like I'm a a cat today." They say, "Okay, I understand that." Obviously not that, but like they offer that at face value. They don't require you to validate your feelings. I think that's a very, very powerful component of an early relationship. And then from there, of course, challenging and why. But I think without that foundation of understanding, it's really tough to get beyond that level.
I agree. I could not agree more, because it's you just need a safe space to express your feelings, right? The moment someone's defensive, they don't want to hear you out, they call you out on it, it almost shuts you down, where you don't even want to continue to bring it up in the future.
Yeah.
And then I feel like all this animosity builds between both people in a relationship, and eventually there's a big breakup.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, and I think we're remiss to not realize how quick that can happen. I mean, I'd say like 2 or 3 times of getting shut down when you share your feelings, you're done. Like, I wouldn't continue to share my feelings if I was shut down twice.
yeah.
Maybe I would go for a third, but then from there, it's like that is like a slippery slope to packing everything under the rug, and a lot of animosity is built. It leads to a lot of destructive communication styles. I'm blanking on what they are, but there's this psychologist. He calls them the 4 horsemen of communicating, like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And basically, they're the biggest indicator that a breakup is going to happen. And I forget what they are, but it's basically criticism is one, contempt is another. Basically, just instead of speaking directly, for instance, you come home and the dishes aren't done. Instead of saying, "Hey, could we do the dishes?" Instead of speaking practically about observation and evidence, you say, "You didn't do the dishes because you hate me and because you're lazy and you take me for granted." It's like, whoa, where did that come from? Well, it came from what we just discussed, sweeping under the rug. That's how animosity builds. And then that neglect leads to further communication challenges. And then from there, it's like a slippery slope. So
Yes. Especially the passive aggressiveness.
Yeah.
I feel like I see that a lot.
Yeah.
Where it's like, they might not even address it, but then just like get mad at something else that's so random, and then now the other person's confused.
Yeah. Yeah. So. It's a great point to look at in a relationship. It's like, when you argue, are you arguing about what's in front of you? Or are you arguing about arguing? Are you arguing about something that happened a year ago and that has no relation to the present? And the biggest thing, it might have been the contempt one, but it's like any argument, even if it's as simple as the dishes, is it goes to character attacks. You don't do this because you don't love me, because you're lazy, you take me for granted. That's like, once you're to that point, of course I believe in your ability to salvage that, but we've got to avoid getting to that point where you're allowing that passive animosity to burst out in little practical moments like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear, obviously you get inquiries and DMs and messages from both sides, but what would you say are the biggest mistakes or issues men have dating?
Ooh, yeah. I think, I think the one that we're describing, a lot of men, they're very focused on a woman's needs, which is great, of course, that they kind of don't neglect their own. And not in like I'm sacrificing myself for the relationship, but they're just not in tune with their own. Like I've done a lot of episodes. I did an episode on what men want. And basically my contention is men just want to be understood. And I think a lot of men aren't understood because they don't ever voice how they feel or anything like that. I also think about myself and a lot of other men who probably have similar mentalities. I think for some reason we've gotten beat into our heads that love and independence are mutually exclusive. They're once you decide that you're ready for a partnership or you found your partner randomly, that independence is by the wayside, that you're done with it. And I think that leads to a lot of problems. Men then create problems in a relationship. They do what I did. They act out until they're broken up with to end the relationship. They do these things because they're like, I still want my independence. And they see that as, a reason to, put some kind of friction in their relationship or to stop trying or something like that. And I think that's wrong. I think, getting back to the question earlier, it's what is the point of a relationship? What is the point of a relationship? I hate the word settle down. I talk a lot about the phrase settle down. It's I don't think the point of a relationship is to settle down. I mean, maybe it is like literally, but I think that phrase really gives us a bad expectation about what love is. I think the purpose of love is to get more out of life. It's not to become boring. I mean, I went to 11 last weekend with my girlfriend. I'm 35. Like, not the right example, but like we travel a lot together. We're building businesses parallel to each other. We're getting more out of life together. I'd say we live a more exciting, way more exciting life now. We stay out way later. We do way more music. We do all these things together. And the idea of independence is one that's really interesting to study too. I think we're very independent of each other, and we don't see it as a risk. We don't see it as a reflection of a lack of health in the relationship. There's something called the dependency paradox, which is an observation in childhood and adolescence and child rearing that basically says the more that a child can count on their caregiver, the closer a caregiver, mother, and a child, for instance, are together, the more independent that the child feels that they can be, right? That when they know that their mom is going to be there for them if they fall or hurt themselves or get beat up at school, they're more willing to take those risks. It's the dependency paradox. The more dependent you are, the more independent you become. And obviously, we're using dependency here in a different way. There's codependence, which is very different. But in the case of the way that I think about independence, that's the way it should be. Like, my partner and I, Emily, are so close together emotionally, physically, proximity-wise, and knowing that we can count on each other, that it makes us feel the power to be independent and do our own things and have our own dreams and have our own aspirations. So I say, men, don't necessarily look to my relationship as the example, but think about independence in that way. Challenge yourself to say that the person that you feel close with, they're going to offer you the most independence. At least they should. So if they don't, then different conversation, but we should look at it through that lens instead of the lens of, I know a lot of women on the flip side who say, oh, he's so independent, or I want to be independent. And they say, well, that must mean this relationship isn't healthy because I want to be independent or he wants to be independent. I'm like, that's not necessarily true, especially if the dependency paradox idea plays out. It could just mean that you feel that you can count on each other and you should want to be independent. I don't know any relationship where it'd be like, I don't want to be independent. I think you should want to have independence of mind and body and soul, and to have, separate things that you're working on. So I think for men, confusion around the topic of independence and self-identity is big. But it's a balance, right? It's a balance of moving from I to we, but also still having that identity. That I think if a man doesn't take the time to really address that, I think that's a challenge. And I think the last thing I would bring up for men that I see a lot of is, I think anytime a relationship is getting serious, or, you meet someone like, wow, this is pretty great. I think we're all eventually at a crossroads. We're like, whoa, like if this continues down this course, things are going to change, right? Maybe we'll move in together. Maybe I'll, now I've got joint responsibility. Maybe we'll have kids one day, things like that. All of a sudden, like you're got a bright light shining in your face, like, whoa, things might get serious. I found a lot of men, and that's called doubt, right? It's healthy doubt. Like I'm about to buy a car. Ooh, do I really buy this car? Should I put $100,000 down for inventory on my business? Ooh, I don't know. Got to do it. We're all faced with doubt at pivotal moments. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad decision. It's doubt because it's a big moment. I've just found that men really suck when it comes to doubt. A lot of men see doubt as the thing that means you should back up, not as the thing that you should grapple with, that you should get introspective about. They see it as the evidence that you need to turn around or go do something different instead of something to analyze. And again, maybe that's just a conversation around men and mindfulness, but adding to the point of independence and just challenging doubt, like challenging what it actually means instead of accepting it at face value, or instead of accepting that independence is not part of a relationship at face value.
So what about the flip side? What would you say are the biggest mistakes women make dating?
Oh man, I would say just putting up with bullshit. I mean, you got to hand it to some men. They're pretty good at playing the game and saying what women want to hear, and I mean there's a lot of science to it too. I mean, like I've done many episodes on like why call it women? Why do women stay in relationships that they know aren't good for them? I mean, there's a chemical dependency being built there when a guy gives her a little bit of what she wants and then backs up. A little bit of what she wants and then backs up. It becomes this cycle of push and pull and like dopamine release and then chasing. And that's where my science ends there. But Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big problem that I see a lot of women putting up with these behaviors, call them mixed signals, call them just poor behaviors, poor commitment, um, and being willing to sit in that land of where there's no clarity, being willing to exist where there isn't a clear line of reciprocity. That plain and simple. And the advice is everything we've been talking about. But for a lot of women, I just see a lot more willingness to do that. And I think the reason why is everything we've also been talking about, right? Pressure on women, lack of willingness to start over, rushing, early 20s, lack of communication, lack of eagerness and incentive to get what you want or get what you need, hoping someone will change. I see a lot of women tend to date in the land of potential rather than reality. That is projecting change, projecting future. Oh, when things settle down, we'll be different, or he'll change, or I'll change, or we'll change, or whatever it may be. The question that I always encourage anyone to ask themselves is, if nothing were to change today, is this good enough for me? And again, not like, is this good enough for me? Like, are they pleasing me? But like, right now, as it is today, is the line of reciprocity in the direction we're heading good enough? If nothing were to change about this, is it good enough? And I think a lot of times in the instances that we're kind of alluding to here, the answer would probably be no, of course not. You're building your entire relationship on hope for the future when something will have changed, when reciprocity finally is offered, when he's over his ex, when work settles down. And, of course, there is something to be said about building a relationship for the future, of course. But like in the present, you need to have the foundation there, not hope for change, and certainly not hoping that someone will change for you. I mean, that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But I'd say those things.
So what would you say makes for a healthy, long-lasting relationship?
Well, besides communication, I think we could put that one to sleep. I think we're good there. I'd say, besides communication, I do think an aligned mentality on what the point of the relationship is. Like, again, cliche, it can't be to complete each other. I think that's just a bad bet to gauge the health of the relationship, for one, and the purpose of the relationship. I do think, just maybe we'll put a cherry on top of the last point, I think it has to, like, the purpose of the relationship should be to get more out of life together. It shouldn't be to settle down. It shouldn't be to be like, I'm going to do less now in life. Although I think like to have a simpler life is a good goal. But I think if your goal is to be like, I'm done with life, I'm done with the hard stage of life, I think, for one, that's not accurate. The relationship is very, very challenging. And if your idea was like settle down, no problems, I think you're setting yourself up to have sticker shock in a sense. So I think that's really important. I'd say that. I mean, I think, like evolving your love languages alongside of each other are really important, because I think eventually you're going to find that, maybe, the energy, the static touch of physical touch, for instance, isn't quite where it used to be. I think we have to be willing to evolve that to be more complex, to be simpler, whatever it may be, because I think every relationship gets boring at a certain point, and I think we need to challenge that kind of feeling, for one. And again, the only way to challenge that is through communication. But I mean, I think any relationship counselor is going to tell you that the hallmark of a relationship is honesty. And if you're not being honest about, one, what you want, and two, what is the point of your union together, then, like, I can't imagine a crazier scenario where you're doing something just to do it. Like, it's easy for me to say this, right? Because if you're in a relationship with kids, for instance, like, it just becomes different, right? You now have a responsibility to take care of those kids. And sometimes the reality is, being together is for the kids. It's not about you anymore. Now we're in a territory of that. And I always try to stay away from topics about like kids and divorce, because I have no idea. I'm not there in my life yet. But I do know, being willing to have conversations around why are you together? Like, maybe even having a conversation like that reminds you of why you're together and you've forgotten it, and that conversation helps. I just think getting the land of like having a relationship just to have one is a big problem. Same with like, why have a business if you don't enjoy the business? Like, why even do that? Like, you have to have an incentive to keep you in it.
Yep.
And I think having conversations around that is the only way to grow and evolve.
What are your thoughts in terms of like delayed gratification versus enjoying the moment and celebrating now? Like, how do you how do you balance the two?
Well, I think it's just that. I think it's a balance. I think, I mean, I think we could, separate life into two things: what we have and what we want, right? I think if we're always focused on what we want, we'll never appreciate what we have. And we opened with talking about regret. I think that's the fastest way to regret, 100%. The soundbite that I always offer people is the absence of what I want does not negate the presence of what I have. Meaning, I can want a ton of things. I can have things that still elude me, but that doesn't mean I can't be grateful for what I have in the present. Doesn't mean I can't get down and celebrate in the present, even though I have work to do. If we're always striving for something, I can guarantee you that you'll never have a finish line that is fully rewarding, because you're always going to be moving the finish line. For me, from a business perspective, I remember when I set a goal, I was like, whatever, $100,000 in revenue or something like that. And I had these bottles of, like Ace of Spades in my apartment. I was like, I'm going to pop that bottle when I hit that goal. I've still never popped that bottle, and I have obviously far surpassed that. It's because every single time I was like, yeah, but that's not really a great finish line. That wasn't a great goal. Let me set it a little higher. And I just keep moving the finish line, and I continued to move it. And I think that is human nature, to move finish lines. And unless we're literally intentional with being like, this is a moment that we're going to celebrate. Not even celebrate, like whatever we're referencing, being in the moment, being present in the moment, and being grateful for the moment. We'll always find a way to rationalize making it bigger or better. I think, a big key in my life that I found is, not getting addicted to bigger and better syndrome. Certainly, I'm a very driven person. I like things. I like money. I like income. I like those things. I like impact. I like listenership. I like email lists. I like all these things. But on a personal fulfillment level, I think a lot of the times we confuse the direction in life. We think that the only way to get what we want and what we deserve is through bigger and better. Bigger goals, bigger things, better partners, better this, better that. And certainly a lot of times that's true. But I've also found that sometimes it's not bigger and better, it's different, or it's simpler. Again, back to what we were talking about earlier. Instead of beating down this path for another year, why don't we try a different path? Why don't we try a simpler path? Why don't we try to have a to-do list that's a little less? Why don't we take a few fewer turns, something like that, whatever it is? Just consider the value of different and simpler instead of bigger and better. And I found that personally, I just want a simple life. I want a simple life where I do a ton of things and earn a lot of money and do all these great things, but not at the expense of being present, being grateful, being still. And I think that's a challenge, especially when you're young and you're hungry, and which is a great mentality. But balance, finding the balance.
Yep. Nice. So I want to move into business, because I think, for our channel, we have a lot of people who subscribe who, want to be entrepreneurs, want to be business. And I think the world of social media is always just curious, right? Because you see a content creator, but you're not really sure how someone makes money, right? So obviously I know you've grown your podcast to, quite a few amount of viewers. Like, are you able to share like how many people listen on a monthly basis now?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I won't share exactly, but I mean, it's just under 1 million a month listens.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say in terms of like, you had that in you to be an entrepreneur, right? Like what are your major sources of income now?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things. So, I mean, for one, I didn't make any money off the podcast for the first 3 years.
Yep.
Never tried, again, talking about, because I worked a job, had the leverage there, never felt compelled that I needed to. My first monetization was journals, which has turned into my biggest business, newmindsethooters.com. I created a journal in 2020. I released it literally in January 2020. It actually didn't do that well. I started on Indiegogo, raised like 40 grand. It didn't do great. It blew up during COVID because for a variety of reasons. For one, everyone was home. There was an increased demand for wellness products. A lot of people were listening to podcasts. My podcast listenership 5x'd over COVID. So I just had the distribution for it, started to do really well. So that one journal now is 7 different journals, plus a book as well. I mean, that business went from nothing to, high 7 figures in the first 18 months, really, really fast.
Wow.
So there was a lot of learning there, and I think that far exceeded my expectations, but it showed me very quickly that if you can create something that is in demand and you can market it in the right way, you could do really well. So that's a big part of my my commerce business is the journals, and they're also on Amazon and things like that. And they're in Barnes and Noble, testing in CVS, things like that. So very simple, just 60-day journals. So that's a big part of my commerce. I mean, it's my own commerce perspective. I've never pursued sponsorship deals or influencer deals or anything like that. It's just never really been my jam because I'm a little type A and I don't want to just, I'll do this deal and then maybe I'll get another one. It's like, I want to own my like recurring revenue is great. Even though I'm on direct to consumer type stuff, it's not recurring, but it's, owning that distribution channel, owning the email list, and then owning everything that goes with it has been really rewarding. So I have that. I'd say my two biggest sources of income are the journals, and then I have a podcasting contract with SiriusXM for the podcast. That's my like influencer type deal. But that's a contract plus a revenue share. Then everything else is I have royalty deals and different products that I've developed. I do a lot of consulting, things like that. It's a pretty good mix. And I do some, paid speaking and some paid posting, but that's like a small part of what I do.
And I think how you approached it is the best way to approach it, right? And I think we're actually seeing the shift now, right? The biggest influencers and creators are pushing more towards a creator-owned brand versus, I'd say in the past, it's really just this huge arbitrage of influencers where they're just pushing other people's product, but they don't build any of their own brand equity.
Yeah. I mean, I've just never been interested in the rat race of trying to prove myself to different brands. I love a good brand partnership. Like I did one with What Do You Meme, and we worked on that product for a year before releasing it. Yeah. That's what I'm into. Oh, nice.
Right here.
Nice.
Because I was like,
there it is.
I had to do some research, man. Better than yesterday.
Dude, look at you, man. You're prepared.
So tell me a little more about this product.
Yeah. So What Do You Meme, of course, is What Do You Meme? It's,
big,
fuck Jerry, parallel to them.
Shout out to Kaplan, by the way.
Yeah. Ben's the man. I mean, this is, one of their first forays into a different kind of game. I mean, they took a risk on this for sure. It's very different from anything that they've ever done before. But basically, it's a 365-day mindfulness card deck. That's basically just 365 different little tasks you could do every day to, get to know yourself better, to challenge yourself, to love yourself. Very simple stuff, ranging from buy yourself a plant, to answer this journal prompt, to give a compliment to a stranger, things like that. And basically I wrote all the prompts for them in parallel, of course, with their editorial team. And they rolled it right out. I mean, that is a great collab, obviously, for me, because it's every Target and Walmart and Amazon. But things like that are great because, for one, you build royalties off that, and that's passive income once you're past the point of creation and promotion. But yeah, I like a good deal that I can sink my teeth into that way. I'm working with a big fitness brand right now for a mindfulness product. I won't say exactly what it is, but something I've never seen before in infusing together mindfulness and fitness. So yeah, I mean, it's been cool to like monetize what I'm good at, and then monetize my distribution channels, but also monetize my expertise and go into other brands and either straight up consulting, or co-creation for, royalties in perpetuity. Like that kind of thing is really attractive to me, and I'll continue to do that. But I mean, I'm releasing more journals later this year. I come out with a book maybe every year and a half or so that basically combines a lot of the things that I've spoken about in over the past 30 or 40 or 50 episodes that I've done. So it's kind of a cool way to see like, product to expertise to some kind of service, but not a whole lot. I never want to like service my, expand myself that much, but so you could take mindfulness in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. So I guess like, what would you say your business goals are, right? Like obviously you have your journal brand that's most of your income. Like, do you want to keep growing that? You said you're releasing more journals. Like, where do you see yourself 3 to 5 years from now in business?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think the journal industry, if there were to be the journal market I think there's a lot of room for innovation there. So I'm going to continue just to create journals along the way. I think there's a big opportunity for very specific journals. I've done journals for breakups. I've done journals for this, that, and the other. I think there's a big market there. Personally, I am after like simplifying things. I think the danger of building, a creator equity in a brand and a company is it's tied to your name and your image. So if your content game isn't strong, if you want to take a step back from creating content, that distribution channel disappears. And there's a certain danger there, of course. Yep. So for me, I'm after for one, podcasting, creating, being Case Kenny, but I won't always want to do that. It's a lot of pressure, and you're always creating. So trying to create something that can outlast and outlive me, and that's bigger than me. So I am releasing something soon. This guy up here, that's it's a focus on building a mindfulness community around a time of day 216 that won't require Case Kenny, but it'll be built on everything that I've learned. So I'm excited to release that. But
nice. So that's gonna be more merch?
It's a community group and merch.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of talking about like social media and content, right? You've been putting out content for quite a while now. What does your week look like right now in terms of content creation? Because you obviously have a ton of posts. You're coming up with ideas. Like what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of writing. I mean, so I create 2 podcasts a week. They're 20-minute podcasts, and I actually write most of it down beforehand.
You script it out.
Not many people know that. Yeah, it's
Wow.
not fully scripted, but I mean, it's pages and pages of like complete sentences. Because the wording is very important, as we can attest to here. So I release 2 of those a week. So each one of those takes about 4 or 5 hours to do.
Each.
Yeah. Just the thought process that goes into it, the outline, the writing, the recording, the editing. I mean, the recording, the editing itself only takes probably 50 minutes or so. Everything else is just the intention that goes into it. And then, I mean, I'll pop up three of these bad boys a week.
3 posts of like 10 different quotes.
Yeah. And that's the hack, of course, on Instagram to do the carousel posts and, basically 10x your surface area. And the algo loves the sharing and the saving ability. Yeah, and those take a surprising amount of time because I gotta walk around and take pictures. Like usually my girlfriend and I walk around.
I see.
Just make her like hold the cards while I walk around, and then I'll take pictures of them, and then gotta go back and post it.
So is that a different content creation process? So you have 4 to 5 hours per podcast.
Yeah, because obviously these are very simple and like the most simple form of mindfulness and self-development content. I mean, for me, like a lot of these are just like forcing me to simplify a 20-minute episode into like 12 words. So like there is some good value there.
So is this from an episode?
A lot of them come from different episodes,
okay.
But a lot of these come from, just what I know about social media is that you've got to find a trigger, like something that triggers people, not like a negative way, but something that people can relate to and something that elicits an emotional response, right? So I did one the other day about, basically it was a quote series called "Sometimes their excuses is the answer you're looking for. Sometimes their inconsistency is the answer you're looking for." Like kind of like poking, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is so true with my ex," like stuff like that. Or like these are more aspirational. Love is being completely comfortable with someone else. Love is trying new restaurants together. Things like that. Like a mix of like tough love and aspiration, all of which are triggering in a sense. And then you do it in a carousel form, and people love to share them profusely. My new business model is Viola Davis just shares all my posts to her feed, and she'll post all my carousels and then a picture of my book on her feed, and she's got 12 million followers or something, and she does it like every post in the last month that I've posted. So she just continues to do it. So
wow,
that's obviously a joke. That's not a sustainable model, but they do get shared a lot.
Yes,
and that's obviously the value of doing a carousel and doing a
especially
they're all the same, right? So
yeah.
You're giving yourself the surface area there. So
do you ever reach like creativity burnout? Because like obviously in the early days it's easier to come up with these ideas, but even now, like do you feel like you're recycling the same thoughts? Like it's not easy to come up with 30 different quotes a week. Granted, you start with the long form first.
100%. Yeah, I'm definitely getting to a point where I'm always down to think of something and write something. I always have the motivation to do it. Sometimes I feel like I'm saying the same thing and I don't want to necessarily be that guy. And then sometimes I try to check myself. I don't want to be someone who just creates content on social media just to get likes and trigger people. Like, again, it's for a purpose. Like I created these today to promote my new book. That's bold of you. Like there's a purpose behind it. And also because I think this is a strong message, of course, but like I never want to feel compelled or pressured or guilted to create content. And I also never want to create it from a place of like, oh, I gotta trigger people today. Like what's going to set people off so that they share it. For me, it's mostly just like, all right, let me get some points on the board this week. Like if I only want to post once a week, I'll just post once a week and it'll end there. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I've got a Google Doc of all my quotes over the years, and it's like 150 pages long. So I've created a lot.
So what's your creative process? Obviously, I know you spend 4 to 5 hours to film a podcast, but
Yep.
do you have time during the week? Is it every morning you sit down and you just, whatever you learned from the past week, you just kind of brain dump? Like, do you have a creative process, or you maybe you go on a walk?
I wish it was that intentional. No, I kind of fly by the seat of my pants, to be honest. I mean, I'm pretty good about like making notes in real time of when I'm inspired by things. I've got 2 docs. I've got a doc of quote ideas, and I've got a doc of podcast ideas.
Nice.
A lot of my quote ideas come from other people. Like, there's a ton of quotes of people saying love is. I'm like, oh, that'd be a good one. Let me give my idea of what love is, and take their idea and be like, that was cool, but let me give 10 other ideas in addition to it.
Nice.
Or like the one I did last week on, the quote I saw that inspired that was someone said, sometimes their behavior is your answer. I was like, all right, well, let's get specific. Let me get specific about what that behavior would be like. So I spent a lot of time consuming other people's content to be inspired by it, or to react to it. On the podcast, I react to a lot of things that I've seen and agree with or disagree with, or try to prove in my world. So a lot of it is just like making sense of the world and writing down notes in real time.
Wow. So that could be on your phone. It could be on your laptop. Whenever you come across something, you just add it to a notepad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a screenshot crazy guy on Instagram and saving things. And yeah, those Google Docs on my phone are just filled with notes and inspo ideas. I spend a lot of time on Twitter as well. Twitter is great for ideas to react to. I'll read like, I don't know, thought catalog to react to different things. I'll listen to other, self-help people's podcasts and see what they're saying. And then I'll either one of two things. I'll either disagree with it, or I'll agree with it, but say, okay, let me prove why this is true given my experience, or let me prove it through my lens, or let me come up with a question to help us prove it, things like that. So I don't think I'll ever run out of ideas. I think there's enough life around us to do that. And I think there's enough inspiration in the form of other people's content, which is great. It kind of takes away the pressure. Like, I was talking to my buddy the other day, another author. It's like very few authors write a book from scratch. Very few others sit down and are like, I want to write a book, unless it's like a pure fiction book.
Yeah.
Most authors are creating books from their best performing blog posts, their best performing YouTube videos, podcasts,
Tweets,
whatever.
you name it.
They're just combining it, they're editing it, they're curating it. That's the best thing. So for me, when I wrote That's Bold of You, that came out in January, that was basically just the culmination of my top podcasts from the past 5 years.
Wow.
And then I stitched them together thematically to fit the ethos of the idea that I was talking about. But very rarely am I creating from scratch, like from zero. It's usually like, oh, I talked about that in one episode. Let me pull that up, and I'll pull that and I'll connect this with that, and we'll make something bigger.
Got it. So like for that book, did you write it yourself, or did you work with a publishing house to help you write it, or what was
that's a whole other story. So I mean, I'm repped by UTA on the literary front, but I self-published this one.
Got it.
For a variety of reasons. For one, I like to move fast, and you go with the traditional publishing house. For one, you're talking a year and a half. You're talking 2 years, and I was ready to go. And two, just the economic model of traditional publishing just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And they're getting better at figuring that out. And I'm not anti-traditional publishing in any sense, but I want to own, and I want to make, I'll make money off that book, hopefully forever, and I'll own it, and I'll own the book, and I'll own the IP on it, and it'll be mine. And I think, talking about financial leverage, a lot of people take book deals because like, oh my gosh, they want to pay me $20,000 up front to write this book. They're paying me to write the book.
Yeah.
I would rather write the book and then make 20 grand the first day of selling it, and then get to keep everything from there.
Yeah. And I think for you, that just makes the most sense. You already had the audience, right, for distribution.
Yeah. And honestly, a lot of people, again, nothing wrong with traditional publishing. I think it makes sense for some people, but I've also published in every way that you can possibly imagine. Like, I have a printing press in Canada and a 3PL in Sacramento, and I know how to print a book. And I've done Amazon print on demand, KDP. I've done direct to publisher, and I haven't done traditional publishing. But I think some people who don't have the understanding that you can print your own book or do a print on demand service, it really opens your eyes to how you can own your equity in whatever you create, rather than giving it away for a quick payday.
Yeah. No, I bought your audiobook last night, and you self-narrated it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I considered not doing that, but then I was like, I podcast for a living. People are going to expect that I did it.
Interesting.
Yeah, that actually took the longest to do.
I feel like I was going to ask that.
I'm not going to say I wrote the book faster than I did the audiobook, but it sure felt like it. That was because it was recording and editing, and then it was just a lot. But I'm glad I did, because that's like pure passive income now.
Yeah.
And a lot of people buy audiobooks. So
yeah. So in terms of like your Instagram page versus your podcast, was there any one that took off like first? Obviously, I know you started getting initial traction on your podcast, but I'm sure the Instagram was a whole other thing, right?
Yeah. The podcast took off and then kind of hit its peak, I think. And that was around the time I started doing the quotes on Instagram. And that was what blew me up. Because a lot of people, they'll follow me and they'll be like, "Oh, I had no idea you had a podcast."
From the podcast. Oh, from
no, they
Instagram.
follow me from Instagram and then realize I have a podcast. That's how it is now. Initially, it was the other way around. Because when I started the podcast, I had 20,000 followers. And I was posting selfies. And then started doing the quotes. And that's what blew up. And that's what, it's like a funnel. That's
so
what
they fed each other, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Initially. And then, ever since then, it's been Instagram to podcast. Because discoverability for podcasts is really difficult on Apple and Spotify. Obviously, video has kind of democratized that a little bit. But getting people to like find your podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is very difficult. There's not a whole lot of discoverability there.
Yep. Cool. Well, I feel like we covered basically the whole spectrum of everything. Yeah. So appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Love it, man. Thank you.